Have you ever watched someone walk into a room, completely confident, only to be met with skepticism? Have you seen a person underestimated, only to turn the tables in the most unexpected way? Tonight, on The Victor Reed Show, that's exactly what happened. Victor Reed was a man who thrived on controversy. His entire career had been built on provocation, making bold, often offensive remarks, particularly at the expense of his guests. People either loved him or loathed him, but one thing was certain. He had no problem disrespecting those he deemed unworthy of his approval. Today was no different. Sitting across from him was Nathan Cole, a self-made billionaire who had built his empire from nothing. But to Victor, Nathan was just another guest to belittle, another successful man he could undermine with a few carefully placed jabs and condescending remarks. As the show began, Victor leaned forward with his signature smirk, his eyes gleaming with arrogance. He chuckled as if Nathan's achievements were nothing more than a stroke of luck rather than years of relentless effort. "So Nathan," Victor began, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "you must be feeling pretty lucky, huh? Right place, right time?" The audience chuckled lightly, already accustomed to Victor's aggressive style. But Nathan didn't flinch. He had encountered men like Victor before, people who believed that a man like him couldn't possibly have earned his success. He smiled, unshaken. "That's an interesting perspective, Victor," Nathan replied smoothly. "Because if luck is all it takes, I wonder why it hasn't worked for everyone." The air in the room shifted. The audience's laughter faded as they sensed a confrontation unlike the usual scripted squabbles of the show. Victor forced a laugh, waving a dismissive hand. "Oh, come on, Nathan, you know what I mean," he said, trying to steer the conversation back to his comfort zone. "Some people just have natural advantages." Nathan nodded thoughtfully. "You're absolutely right. Some people do have advantages. Let me tell you about mine." He leaned forward slightly, his voice unwavering. "I grew up in a neighborhood where success stories were rare. My mother worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. I started my first business with nothing but an idea and an obsession with making it work. No inheritance, no safety net, no shortcuts." The room fell silent. Even Victor, who thrived on controlling conversations, hesitated for a moment. "I built companies, created jobs, and reinvested in communities that were forgotten. And every step of the way, people like you told me I didn't belong. But here I am." Victor cleared his throat and shifted in his seat. This wasn't how the conversation was supposed to go. He was supposed to have control. He was supposed to make his guests squirm. But somehow, the dynamic had flipped. And for the first time in a long time, Victor Reed found himself at a loss for words. "Well, Nathan," Victor said, forcing a smile, "I'm not saying you didn't work hard. But let's be real. Plenty of people work just as hard and never make it." Nathan nodded. "That's true. But do you know why?" Victor raised an eyebrow. The audience leaned in. "It's not because they aren't smart enough. It's not because they don't put in the effort. It's because when they fail, they don't get a second chance. They don't have doors opening for them based on connections. They don't get the luxury of being average and still making it to the top." A murmur ran through the audience. The tension in the room thickened. Victor shifted uncomfortably. This was his stage, his show. He was supposed to be the one leading the conversation. But somehow, the guest sitting across from him was commanding the moment with unshakable confidence. "The difference between me and the people you consider naturally successful isn't work ethic," Nathan continued. "It's opportunity. It's the ability to fail without being written off. It's walking into a boardroom and not having to prove that you deserve to be there before you even speak." Victor opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out, because deep down he knew Nathan was right. For the first time, the host, known for making others uncomfortable, was the one shifting in his seat. Have you ever witnessed a moment when someone who always holds the power suddenly finds themselves losing control? When the master of the stage becomes the one struggling to keep up. The air in the studio remained thick with anticipation. Victor Reed, known for his quick wit and sharp comebacks, sat across from Nathan Cole, his usual smug demeanor beginning to crack. The audience, typically entertained by Victor's unfiltered bravado, now seemed captivated by something else. Truth. Victor leaned forward, grasping at the last threads of control. "Nathan, let's not act like every system is against you. Hard work still counts for something, doesn't it? Or are you saying that effort means nothing? Nathan didn't hesitate. Hard work absolutely matters, he said, his voice steady. But tell me, Victor, why does it seem to matter more for some than for others? The murmurs in the audience grew louder. Victor shifted in his seat. He had faced countless guests before, but Nathan wasn't flustered by his tactics. Instead, he was turning the conversation into something Victor couldn't control. Nathan continued, his tone unwavering. There are people out there working twice as hard, yet they don't get second chances. They aren't granted the benefit of the doubt. They aren't allowed to fail up. That's the difference. Victor let out a hollow chuckle. So what's your solution? We just hand success to everyone. Nathan smiled, not with arrogance, but with patience. No one is asking for handouts, Victor. What people want is a fair shot. The same opportunities, the same starting line. Is that really too much to ask? A woman in the audience suddenly spoke up. He's right, she said, her voice strong. My brother worked twice as hard as his colleagues, but he never got promoted. They told him he just wasn't a good fit. Others in the audience nodded, murmuring their own stories of unseen struggles and invisible barriers. Victor ran a hand through his hair, the pressure mounting. He had never lost control of his own show before. He had built his career on making people squirm. Yet here he was, on the receiving end, desperate. He forced a grin. Look, I'm not saying there aren't challenges. I just think people spend too much time blaming the system instead of taking responsibility. Nathan leaned back slightly, studying Victor. Responsibility, he repeated. Tell me, Victor, how many times have you been told you don't belong in a room? How many doors have closed on you before you even knocked? Silence. Victor had no answer. Nathan didn't let up. Success stories shouldn't be used as proof that everything is fair. They should make us ask why so many others never even get the chance. The audience erupted into applause. Victor's usual smirk faltered. He wasn't used to being the one on the defensive, but for the first time, he realized that his usual tactics weren't enough. He was losing the argument. He was losing his audience. And most of all, he was losing control. Victor swallowed hard, gripping the armrests of his chair. He opened his mouth to argue, to fight back, to reclaim his authority. But as he looked at Nathan, calm, composed, owning the conversation, he knew it was already too late. Nathan Cole leaned forward, his piercing gaze locked onto Victor Reed. The truth is, when people like me succeed, it's not because the system is fair. It's because we fought harder than we ever should have had to. And when people like me don't succeed, it's not because we didn't work hard enough. It's because the system was designed to keep us out. A murmur spread through the audience, louder this time. Some nodded, a few clapped, and then a woman in the back stood up and shouted, "That's right." Applause rippled through the room, growing stronger. The energy in the studio was shifting, and Victor felt it, the slow, humiliating unraveling of his control. This wasn't his moment anymore. It was Nathan's. For the first time in his career, Victor wasn't leading the conversation. He was losing it. Victor sat frozen, his signature smirk nowhere to be found. The weight of Nathan's words pressed down on him. He had built his career on being the loudest voice in the room, the man who always had the final say. But today, silence was his only weapon, and even that was failing him. Nathan let the moment stretch before speaking again, his voice steady. This isn't about making you the villain, Victor. It's about making people see the truth. And the truth is, people like me aren't asking for handouts. We're asking for a fair shot. The audience erupted, cheers, applause, even a few standing ovations. The shift was undeniable. Victor had lost them that a producer's voice crackled in his earpiece, urging him to wrap it up. He cleared his throat, his mind racing. How could he recover? How could he spin this? But deep down he knew it was over. Nathan leaned back, his work done. I just hope, Victor, that after today, you'll think about the things you've ignored for so long. Victor forced a tight smile. Well, he said, his voice lacking its usual bravado, that's certainly something to think about. But everyone knew his words were empty. The damage was done. The illusion was shattered. As the cameras cut and the credits rolled, Victor sat there, staring at the audience that once cheered his every word. Now, they were clapping for someone else. For the first time, Victor had to face a truth he had spent his entire career avoiding. The studio emptied slowly, but Victor remained seated, watching as his crew moved about, packing up equipment, murmuring among themselves. He wasn't used to this feeling, this loss of control. The Victor Reed everyone knew was untouchable. He dictated the narrative. He twisted the facts to suit his agenda. But tonight, he had been exposed. Nathan gathered his things, buttoning his jacket with the same quiet confidence he had walked in with. As he made his way past Victor's desk, he paused. "It's not personal, Victor. It never was. But for people like me, it's always been about survival. You can mock it, downplay it, try to spin it, but that doesn't change the truth. And the truth always catches up." Victor didn't reply. He couldn't. What was there to say? Nathan walked out of the studio, greeted by a few supporters waiting outside. Cameras flashed. Journalists scrambled to get a quote. The world outside was already reacting. Victor exhaled, finally rising from his chair. He glanced at the monitors, seeing the final freeze frame of the episode, a still image of Nathan Cole, standing firm, unshaken. Tomorrow, the headlines would roll in. The internet would dissect every second of the exchange. Victor Reed, the king of controversy, had finally been dethroned on his own stage. And the worst part? He knew he had no one to blame but himself. Victor took a deep breath and walked toward the exit. The studio was nearly empty now, the bright lights dimmed. As he reached the door, he hesitated for a brief moment, looking back at the space where he had once commanded absolute authority. For the first time, he questioned everything. His approach, his beliefs, his legacy. Maybe this was just another interview, another headline that would fade with time. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of his reckoning.